In this episode, we talk to Carole and Vera. Carole, thank you so much for joining this episode of the Xavier Social Justice Network podcast. Can you share a little bit about your background?
Thanks for inviting us to join you, Rich. Yeah, so I am a teacher. I'm an EAL teacher. I've been a teacher for over 25 years now, and a lot of that time I've worked in a program called the Adult Migrant English Program, the AMEP, we call it. I volunteered. And I also currently volunteer in the CRISP program with my husband and all our kids. We've helped welcome a family from Afghanistan with 4 kids through that program, and that's just been just a wonderful experience. I think my first love is teaching, but I now manage, a team and that supports newly arrived migrants and refugees who are settling in Australia. By matching them up with wonderful volunteers out there in the community, and lots of them come from the Xavier Social Justice Network. So that's a bit about me.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for joining our podcast. And Vera, welcome. Tell us a little bit about who you are for our listeners.
Thanks for having us. My name is Vera, and I am originally from Iraq in the Middle East. I migrated to Australia with my family in 2018, so it's been 7 years now. A bit about me as a person, I guess I'll talk a little bit more in details, but when I came here I was 19, and I was at a tricky age to kind of navigate where to go to next, and it's been a long journey of settlement and learning and growth and finding or building a new home in Australia, but that's a little bit about me.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. So in our last episode, we spoke about the AMEP program in a bit more detail. And I wanted to build on that last podcast and talk a bit about settlement and coming to Australia and how we can support people to feel more included. I'd love to talk a bit about how we build communities with purpose and connecting people who are potential volunteers into those communities and building communities around that, and the importance of doing that together and not thinking that anyone, part of those relationships has all the answers, and how do we find those answers together, and how to get involved, maybe formally and informally. I'd also love to hear about your story, Vera, and maybe some of the heroes that you sort of think are the heroes of your own journey of integration into Australia, and knowing that most likely you're a hero to other people as well. So maybe some of your own story about how you feel you've impacted other people as part of your integration and connection. So where do you want to start?
I guess maybe I can just start with, talking about settlement. As someone who really hasn't lived it, really. I mean, I spent time overseas. My parents are migrants themselves, but I was born in Australia. But just as someone who's observed lots of people, living through that challenge often. There was a study done by the Australian Institute of Family Studies. It was a 10-year study, and it's called Building a New Life in Australia. And in that study, you can really see how settlement isn't linear. And often it's never sort of done, And there were so many examples in that study that spoke about that, and people who've been living in Australia for many, many years, but who still feel like, there is a sense of feeling like they still have to prove that they belong, or they don't quite know everything, or, or they still slip up and they feel a little bit like an outsider. So I guess in that space, there's lots of also really positive stories of settlement. There absolutely are, but it's good to sort of start from that humble sort of realisation that it's hard and it can take many, many, many years. And it's about lots of things. It's about language, and that's very much a focus for me as an EAL teacher, where we sort of talk about language being a bit of the key, to so much. But it's also about just having people networks, knowing stuff about systems and how to navigate them, knowing what questions to ask, all those sort of things. Having friends, being able to, have a casual conversation, being able to do small talk, is often, all those little things are really, really important in that settlement journey for someone to really feel like they've connected and they feel like they belong.
think this is really interesting because the notion or the idea of settlement is not something that the everyday person would even consider, because when you're born into the culture and the societal and the structural elements of society, you take it for granted that you know what you're doing. So I think this is really interesting. How do you help somebody who doesn't know what you're supposed to know?
Yeah. The other side is people come with so much to offer, right? So belonging is about knowing you can contribute and knowing that that contribution is going to be valued and recognised. And, that is a huge piece of settlement. Knowing that you have come and you've got these skills, you've got life experience, you've got these characteristics that really you want to give and you want to contribute, and just having the opportunities to be able to do that can be sometimes really hard. Knowing that sometimes the door's not wide open for you and you've got to knock a few times. Those sort of experiences for people can be really tough. And I think everyone actually has a part to play in that part, making sure that people, feel valued and feel like they've got the opportunities to contribute.
I think this is really interesting, and I'll come to you in a moment, Vera, but there's a book I read several years ago, Community, The Structure of Belonging, by Peter Block. And you use the word belonging there, which I think is really interesting. And he broke it, defined it in 3 different ways. Belonging meaning I feel part of something. Belonging, that is, I own something. And longing to be, or this sort of sense if I'm apart from, I want to come back to. And I think as somebody who's been part of that journey of belonging to Australia, tell us about that story, Vera.
That's a big question. And I wonder, sometimes it's been 7 years, 7 years can feel like a long time, but also not a whole lot of time, and that journey is still ongoing for me. But I like to just touch on what Carole said. Settlement is not linear and does it really end? And settlement often starts not when people arrive to Australia, starts a lot earlier, and it's different for many, many people. For me, settlement started the moment I was born. My family left Iraq for the first time in the late 90s and went to Jordan seeking refuge. Stayed in Jordan, and that's where I was born. Originally from Iraq, but I was born in Jordan. Born into this idea of we are seeking a safe place. That was my first experience in this life. Didn't know anything else, but I always knew that we were waiting for that piece of paper. It's called a visa that will take us somewhere else safer, but I didn't know what that place was. After almost 10, 11 years in Jordan, we got rejected by all the countries we could apply for. Lost hope. My family decided to go back to Iraq. For me, that was all different and didn't understand what was happening. We went back to Iraq with no desire to leave again, because we tried, or my family tried, and it didn't work. So went back to Iraq, tried to rebuild life again from zero in our own country, and facing settlement in our own country, Then, 9-10 years later, in 2014, with the rise of ISIS in the north of Iraq, my family, among many other Christian families, felt threatened, and we started to reconsider the idea of leaving again, which we ended up doing a year after that, and this time went to Lebanon. Now, this time we were lucky because we had more family in Australia, and we were able to apply for a humanitarian visa through an offshore program, which you can only apply for if you have a sponsor or a relative in Australia, and we did, and only stayed, for 3 years, nearly 3 years, and then arrived in Australia in 2018. So from my story, what I'm trying to highlight is that, settlements for me and for my family started, years ago, and it's still ongoing. And throughout all these years, I've battled with this sense of belonging. I've battled with trying to find find it in places, trying to find it in people, in communities, in things I do. And until this day, it's a question I reflect on a lot. But what I learned, because I've moved a lot, that it isn't necessarily tied or connected to a place. More often than not, you have to find it in yourself first and then in the people around you. So it's in the communities and in the relationships that you build, which is why I think community is so important for anyone that's settling to feel that sense of belonging. It's not about the place, really.
I wonder if you could tell me about what you most value or you feel most connected with around community.
Around a community in general?
A community in general. The communities you're a part of, what has you feel connected to them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. When I was growing up, I was a very rebellious, teenager, young person, as many young people are, and I believed that I was doing everything on my own. I got this. I'm doing everything on my own. But now that I'm a little bit more mature and older, I can see that no one really does anything on their own, even if you think you are doing something on your own, and especially if you're going through adversity. And people that come out of adversity stronger, there's always a support system behind you, even if you don't recognize it or acknowledge it. And for me, how I feel connected is in those small moments where I recognize my own weakness as a human being and I say, I need help, or I'm not sure where to go to next. I'm not sure how to show up in a job interview. Can someone tell me how to do that? It's those little things where I feel connected. But also, like Carole said, it's just being able to know that you've got people that you can just be yourself with, have those small conversations and not necessarily earn your right to belong, that you are, because we all have the right to be. Yeah.
Thank you. So, Carole, maybe you could share your experience around building communities and some of those like practical things all those things you've done in order to help people connect and find how they can contribute to each other. When I first met you, I wrote down Carole's a linchpin of possibilities and seeing opportunity and connecting people to make that happen. So I'm curious about what you see and how you get communities connected.
The first thing is there's so many communities that are very intact and very active. And, they could be, those sort of community groups might be where you live. And in my case, I've come across those community groups in my work. I've just been lucky enough, really, to be able to go to all parts of metropolitan Melbourne and regional Victoria. And I've seen, these communities in action, and I'm talking about multicultural communities. And I've been lucky enough to be, often invited in to celebrations or festivities. You have to build relationships as well. And I think, being open to that and just being open to having a conversation, a very simple conversation with someone, finding out a little bit more about, who they are. And I think when you start, opening up also about yourself and sharing with someone else, then you start to see opportunities around you to collaborate. So in my case, often it's been around, collaborations and working together. And sometimes the thing is, sometimes you might hold a little bit of knowledge that the other person doesn't have. And so it's like, oh, hang on a minute. Actually, what you're talking about there, I know something that might help you, or I know something that you could connect to that, you might like to pursue. And so being open to sort of sharing those insights, not keeping them to yourself or thinking, oh, I'm going to make a decision here and not share this because I don't think it will work. No, it could work. Somebody else might have another piece of that puzzle. So I often, for colleagues that work with me, I'll often say, we're not gatekeepers here at all. We're just, the door's wide open. And I think it's about, for me, I've tried very hard to really be somebody that opens up those conversations and shares insights and is open to connecting people. And I'm never disappointed. Things happen when you've sort of got that outlook. In those conversations as well, I guess I can add that I try really hard to be attentive to what I'm hearing as well. And sometimes, when you try and do that, then you're hearing things that you might not have heard if you were busy, thinking about other things. And language can sometimes seem like a barrier. But if you can be really attentive when you're speaking to somebody who might not have English, perfect English, you can really have in-depth conversations. And then, then you're really making, stronger connections as well. So I don't see it, sure enough, it's frustrating when you can't express yourself the way you want to. But, nowadays, that's not, there's, if you've got a bit of patience and you've got a little bit of imagination, there's and a bit of a sense of humour as well, there's some great ways to connect and to start to have deeper conversations and get to know each other. And
So what I'm hearing from that is, I won't say it's not difficult. It seems pretty simple. You listen to another person, or listen to a group. You're willing to be changed through that connection, and you have the courage to share an idea or a thought or a suggestion and see where it might go. Is there something else to it that you can? I know I made it sound simple then, but it doesn't. We'd have to dream big. We just have to dream the next step.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah. And the other thing is, I guess that openness, we're so, people talk about a lot at the moment, we're all in our bubble. Yeah, we're all in our bubble. Mm-hmm. And, so we can spend, days and days and days and connect with people that are like us and that think like us and that move in the same circles as us and have similar experiences to us. I just think, there's so much more. And I think, there's a yearning out there for people to move out of their bubbles anyway. And volunteering is a great way of doing that. You can do it in your work and you can do it wherever you are, really. I mean, there's endless possibilities there. But I think, having that openness can sometimes, be the key.
So Vera, I think this thread here of openness and the invitation from Carole is for those of us who are, part of mainstream society to have openness and courage to step outside our bubble. But the other side is that for those people that are coming into a new community, they're on the outside of the bubble and they have the courage to step in. Can you share a bit about when you stepped into a new community, what were some of the differences that really made a difference for you as you found your way?
For me, I don't know. I've always been someone that wanted to, maybe because we've moved a lot, I always wanted to fit in quickly, and I've learned how to do that, and people say to me, your English is really well and you sound like, you were born here. But I often say it's a survival mechanism that I've picked up to be able to fit in quickly and feel like I'm the same, because I don't want to stand out. And I'll go a little bit about, to share some of the story. When I first came to Australia, like I said, young people, you're passionate and interested about everything, but you don't really know where you want to go. So there's, infinite possibilities. And I was one of those, I was interested in a lot of things, but I didn't really have a clear idea. We came and we were very, the first 2 weeks, very excited about, reuniting with the family. So there wasn't much thought about what's next. Until I was talking to one of our relatives who asked me, what are you going to do? Okay, great, you've settled. Have you put any thought into it? What's next for you? And the first answer I said, which is what everyone told me, was, I have to learn English first. So I'll probably go to language school, probably AMEP, and then pathway into TAFE from there because I can't go to school. I'm 19, too late, missed the train. She was one of those people that wasn't a gatekeeper, and like Carole said, she knew that there was another path, and she looked at me and said, "Can I give you an advice?" And I said, "Yes." She goes, "Don't go to language school try to enroll in a normal, mainstream school. See if you can do that first. Because if you can, I know it's going to be really hard, but it will set you up to go into university, and it'll be a better pathway for you as opposed to going into, not that there's anything wrong with going to language school or going into TAFE, but her advice was that it'll be easier for you to blend in or settle or, transition in the long run. And for me, that thought was terrifying. It was really scary to think about going into school and Year 12. But like you said, it takes, yes, there's support out there and there's people who are opening the door and showing you the way, but it also comes back to you as a person. You have to take on the work. You have to put yourself out there and you have to say, I'm willing to do the hard work. And so for me, I didn't think that I had a chance. I was 99% sure that no school would take me, but I just wanted to go to a school and go back and tell her, see, I told you that it wasn't going to work. And so I went to the nearest school to my house, and the principal had a 5-minute conversation with me. He asked for my transcript from Iraq that was, 4 years old, from year 11. And he called me the next day, said, I don't usually do this. I think you have a chance. Come enroll as soon as possible. And at this point, we're mid-Feb. As you know, schools start late January. Not only am I 2 weeks behind, but I felt years behind because I had no idea. I didn't know anything about the system, the education system in Australia, and just the thought of Year 12 was very terrifying for me. But I knew opportunities don't come easily. And I didn't want to live with what if, and I didn't want to regret not trying. So went and I enrolled. It was a very tough year, but I passed, and with the support of many people. But I think there's two aspects to it, There's people that are giving you their hand, but you also have to be willing to hold their hand and show up when it's hard.
So that, to me, sounds that principle, or potentially even your relation, are two differences that made a difference, or relationships that made a difference in getting started in Australia. Can you tell me about another hero in your journey that has supported you, or you've supported?
Absolutely. I mean, I'll highlight another aspect because a lot of people ask me, how did you get into school? Because just to make it clear, it's not easy. A lot of young people don't get given this opportunity, and it's very sad to see because there's so much growth that happens in the school environment. But when I reflect back, at the time I didn't think it was hard. Now I see how a lot of young people come and they can't get into mainstream school. They really find it challenging to learn and move forward faster. But when I reflect back, another person that made a difference was my sister. So I was lucky that I had my family here, and my sister was in Australia for 2 years before we came. She came with me to the school, and my sister was advocating for my education. She really pushed hard. And when the principal in the school saw that, they had more confidence in taking me because they knew I had someone supporting me, someone who knows the system, who's advocating for me and pushing for my success. And so they said, yes, of course we'll take you. Of course we know we have to work to support you. Of course you're different than, a normal, not normal, nothing abnormal about refugees, but, someone who's born in Australia. But we also know that there is support around you, and we know that you have a chance, like he said. And I think that's very important to highlight because we need people advocating for young people today to hold their hand and take them to the school and talk to teachers, talk to principals, because at the end of the day, it comes down to the school. There's no system. It was that principal's decision. If I went to another school, maybe I would have gotten a different response. And so my sister is another hero, and someone that obviously she understands what I've gone through, and she comes from that perspective. But there's also other people who didn't have the lived experience, but still advocated and fought really hard. And that includes all of my teachers at the school.
I think this is a really interesting thread here, Carole, of for volunteers or people thinking about volunteering. The two things you mentioned there are support and advocacy. Thinking about how to be supportive and how to be an advocate. From your experience, what are some of those formal ways or those informal ways that people can help out?
The previous podcast gave a really good example. Be a volunteer tutor in the volunteer tutor scheme. That's fantastic. But those volunteers, not to scare people off, but when those volunteers sign up, it's really, support someone to practice English. But they do so much more. Yeah. They do so much more. And I think, Vera, that example you gave of not going alone to the school, having your sister there who was, advocating for you, but that not going alone anywhere really, to something as important as that is just the image came to me of volunteers in the VTS doing that, going to an appointment, going to get information from a service, with somebody. All those simple things that when you have to navigate those things on your own are really hard. And you I think, Julia in the podcast, I heard she said, that when she's nervous, she loses her English. And I think just having someone that can accompany you, you're doing everything. You're the one that's, got the self-agency and you're sorting your own life out. But to have someone accompanying you is just fantastic. And it makes a big difference. We're not saviours, you know what I mean? We're not coming in and supporting people in a way that, you've got all the answers. No, it's really about just walking with someone and being there and being an enabler as best you can, and being advocacy or just giving someone that confidence that they need, or, asking a question that they might not have thought of, just to making sure that someone often for me, when I'm in the work that I do, I often find myself asking lots of questions in those circumstances. And what that does is it offers the person who's actually making decisions about themselves, it gives them more of an informed choice. And so that's sometimes a really powerful way to accompany someone.
Can I just add there, just to really, second that, oftentimes when you're in a position of wanting to help, we come to it with this idea that I've got something to give, that I am in a better position to help you. But we also think that I have to have all the answers, to know how to help you. And it comes with a huge responsibility, and that sometimes can put people off from helping because they're like, I don't know, I don't know how to help. I'm barely figuring my life out. But it's not really up to you to assume what the other person needs. Your role is to ask. Your role is to listen and be guided, because most of the time the answers are within that person. They know what they need. They just need the space to explore that. And so be that sounding board. You don't need to have all the answers, but just create space.
What you just shared there, Vera, of an accompaniment. What is it about the volunteers in your life that have supported you and advocated for you that has been most helpful?
I would say the first thing that comes to my mind is self-belief or faith in yourself. I guess it's fair to say as human beings we all doubt ourselves. It's not something, no one has experienced in their lives. And when you've got people there by your side, just whether they're actually offering you something or just listening to you, whatever it is that they're supporting with, just their presence makes you believe in yourself more, because you're like, they must believe in me to think that there's a chance. If they had zero belief in me, then they wouldn't even be here, right? Why try? And I think to me that's the biggest aspect, where all of these instances where someone wanted to help me, that principle saying you have a chance, it encouraged me to take that step, because I'm like, they believe in me. This person I met 5 minutes ago, he doesn't know me, but he has faith and confidence in me, then I can also have that. And you kind of take that step, you jump, you dive, you don't really know what's next, but you start to trust yourself more and more that you'll figure it out. And then 7 years down the track, you feel so much more confident to sit and record a podcast and share your story. And so I think for me, that's key. If you can help someone build confidence in themselves, they'll be fine. They'll be okay wherever they go.
Yeah. Now, I think this is a really important perspective you shared there, Vera, because in part the accompaniment and the volunteer or the advocate or who might have been believing in you helped create the opportunity for you to experience something so you can believe in yourself. But I think the flip side also applies, that if I'm a volunteer and I don't know what I'm doing, the only way I'm going to start believing in myself as a volunteer is by doing it and having the person I'm volunteering accompany me as I learn to be a volunteer.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you could share any story about that, Carole, of the volunteer learning to believe in themselves as a volunteer.
Yeah.
And
you know what? COVID offered so many opportunities for that to happen. And one of the reasons was that many of our volunteers, not a majority, but we have many volunteers who are not so good with technology. And suddenly, the volunteer tutor scheme at the time had to flip and go remote, as we all did. And we did it really early on. What we thought was to try and give people the confidence to do that. We said, okay, you can start at the point where the learner is at. So if a learner is really good at using their phone, then it's a phone call. If they like to use WhatsApp, then use WhatsApp. If they're doing FaceTime, then use FaceTime. If they're, wherever they're at, go there. And then we'll support you, and we'll probably move to maybe a platform that's more conducive to maybe doing some learning, online. But what we found a lot of the time was that the learners were much more competent because they're so good. It's so important for them to stay in contact with family all over the world. Often, many refugees have family that have settled in lots of different parts of the world, and so they're so good at keeping in contact with people remotely. That's actually their reality a lot of the time, and it's very sad often, that they know that the remote connection is going to be the connection that they have with family for a long time, and so they were so confident at doing that, and so we got lots of volunteers who learned a few tricks, so that was good.
Fantastic. So maybe one last question for both of you is, the Xavier Social Justice Network has, we call them the friends of the network. And a friend of the network is somebody who may have volunteered in the past, who isn't currently volunteering, or a current volunteer, an active volunteer working with one of our partners, or somebody who's thinking about it and doesn't quite know where to start. I've heard in this particular conversation is that you can formally volunteer and say, I'm in the role of volunteering. And sometimes you don't even know you're in the role of volunteering because someone sees you in that way, even if you don't see yourselves in that way. So what advice can you share with somebody who's a friend of the Xavier Social Justice Network that has them move from being inspired to volunteer or to continue to volunteer to really activating and getting out there and accompanying somebody who really would benefit from that connection, that support, that advocacy? What's your advice?
First of all, if you're somebody who's not actively volunteering right now, but you're friends of the Xavier Social Justice Network, you've got so much that you can be doing informally where you're at right now. Like, you don't have to think any further than that, really. But if you can build connections where you're at now and pass on information to the Xavier Social Justice Network about opportunities that are out there, then that's brilliant. Can you talk about the network? Can you connect people to the network? Can you ask questions about others' experiences, doing the stuff that they're doing within the network, and then share those experiences with your friends? Create a little bit of excitement around this, those stories are very, very powerful. So if word of mouth is the only thing you can be doing, then do it. You know, you might be somebody that owns a business or works in a big corporation. I don't know. You might hear of jobs that are available. You know, you might be able to start to talk about, you might be someone that actually recruits people, hires people. You might start to think about the experiences that you're hearing about those other volunteers that are out there working maybe in the AMEP with, you know, accompanying a refugee. And you might say, well, actually, I can do my part. I could sort of open up opportunities to people that I wouldn't have thought about previously. Knowing, you know, through these stories, you're starting to hear about, how, you know, it can be quite difficult, you know, settling. You've heard this podcast yourself. You might start to think, okay, what can I do where I'm at to make life a little, to bring these opportunities to people that might not otherwise have them. So that's sort of changing your mindset a little bit, you know, that is something that you can do right now. And then, of course, you know, I'd be lying if I wouldn't want you to, you know, join up, start being active, you know, be involved. You get so much out of volunteering. You know, it's the, you know, if you're doing face-to-face group style volunteering, which I'm sure Xavier Social Justice Network has many of those on offer, then, you know, the camaraderie, the connection is fantastic among volunteers, let alone, you know, recipients of the service that you might be offering. And then if you're wanting something ultra flexible, something like the VTS, you know, within the MEP that you heard about in the last podcast, that is fantastic as well, because you can do it at any, you know, at a mutually convenient time and place. And, you know, and it's a one-on-one activity, and so you're not waiting on someone else to tell you what to do. You know, you're just finding a time that suits you and the learner, and off you go, you know, and it can be done remotely or face-to-face. You know, there's some really flexible options there for volunteers. So you don't, I think that the thing is we get caught up thinking, you know, of a particular, you know, specific type of activity, and actually be open to something that's quite different to what you might have expected. And there's a lot of choice out there.
Reflections from you, Vera, of getting involved.
Carole, you know, answered that beautifully. There's many ways to be involved, whether it's through a formal program like the Volunteer Tutor Scheme, which is one of many volunteering programs out there, because the Volunteer Tutor Scheme may not be the right program for you. You know, it's every volunteering role or experience requires a set of skills. So utilize your skills. You know, what are you really good at? Maybe you're great at computers, and I don't know, you can volunteer through offering something that you're really good at. It doesn't have to be big. Whatever it is that you decide to do, whether it's formally or informally in your own small community or at a larger scale, what I'll say is that oftentimes when we're trying to do something good, we want feedback. We want to be told that we're doing something good, you know, that you're volunteering, that you're making a difference. The reality is you don't always get that feedback. You just have to plant the seeds and trust that they're growing. And sometimes you're not going to see the fruits of those seeds. I have people that supported me when I first came. I wish I can see them today and tell them, hey, I'm doing all this. But they're not really seeing the impact of their support, because it takes time. You have to do your part, plant the seeds, and trust. Allow the person to walk their own journey and trust them to walk it at their own pace as well. You may not always see how they're going to grow because of you, but just trust that you are making an impact, small or big. And so I'll say, what are you good at? Focus on that, utilize your skills. And when you meet someone, ask them, what are you good at? Because if you focus on someone's strengths, you can help them grow much more than if you focus on their trauma. I'm not saying don't focus on their trauma, be aware of it and mindful of it, but be led by a strength-based approach. That's what really helps someone grow.
Fantastic.
And look at them beyond the refugee label. You know, I sometimes don't want to be constantly looked at as a, you know, we're all human. So yeah, fantastic. So that's my piece.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Xavier Social Justice Network podcast. Deep thanks to Vera and to Carole for joining me for this episode and for sharing your stories of hope lost and definitely hope found, and the importance of providing opportunities and meeting people where they're at, and recognising that we're always making a difference even if we don't recognise or know that we are. Remember, we have our Dare to Be Different forum. It's coming up in August, and the event details, including the registration link, are going to be in the show notes. And as an added bonus, both Carole and Vera and another colleague of theirs, Gorel, is going to be at this year's Dare to Be Different forum speaking. So if you want more of this exciting story, then make sure you register and come along to this year's Dare to Be Different forum. Also, if this episode has inspired you to get connected with the Xavier Social Justice Network and to register as a volunteer with us, then please follow the links below, connect with us, and one of our amazing coordinators will connect you with the partnership that it will work for you and work for the volunteer. Until next time, thank you so much for joining us in this particular podcast. Until next time, thank you.